Well, welcome to this session. It's the weekend of the 2nd and 3rd of April in 2022, and today we're speaking with Steve Cooney. Now, Steve is an IT professional who lives and works in New Zealand, and for at least 4 decades, maybe more, he's been involved in the collection of Baha'i materials. And on that journey, he has experienced and been part of the digital changes that have occurred in all things to do with books and bibliography. That's procurement, cataloging, storage, maintenance, and including maintenance of a bibliography. And we're very privileged today, I think, for the first time to all of us stop and give Steve time to explain what he does, his background in this work, his motivations, his methodologies, and his visions of the future of this important area. Before I throw the floor to Steve, I'll just make a few comments, very brief comments on this matter of digitization and the change to libraries. Let me just make a few points off the top of my head. The first is that the sites for book collection have changed. We used to think of physical sites for a collection of books, a Baha'i library. And of course, that's now both a physical site and a virtual site. And in terms of book collection, we used to go into bookstores and see what was there. And then there were book catalogs that could be mailed to you. So you had a mail catalog and you would see what was available. And that's completely transformed because now you have digital platforms, the large booksellers, Amazon, Abbey Books, Book Depository, many more. Plus each book publisher now has their own site at which they not only publish books, but they sell them as a retailer online. And it's also now common for institutions to refer not to books, but to knowledge products, which has completely blurred the idea of a book. But, you know, we have these knowledge products available. But that indicates the transition to digital items. Books often still have a cost, but digital items can sometimes be added or available for free, the same product. Now, in an earlier phase, libraries, in order to give the books to their readers, they had to purchase the physical volume, have it on the shelves, and then you can say, yes, the library has the book. But the new model is that a library will purchase a subscription from a publisher that goes in a catalog, and that purchase is invoked when a legitimate member of the library clicks on that catalog and said, I'd like to read this book, and that invokes a purchase. So there's a whole new concept of what's in the library. If you say, how many volumes do you have in your library? Well, that's changed now. It's not physical volumes, it's potential volumes, it's electronic volumes, digital volumes, etc. So a lot of blurring of what is the size of a collection now. And we've also learned from previous sessions that the digital era has opened up the concept of search. So to search for Baha'i materials used to be quite a task, and you had to go into a reference section of a library to do that search. And as we know from these sessions so far, that you no longer have to do that. You can search from home, from any computer outlet. But the reason I'm bringing that up now is that the question of what is an item to be collected in a Baha'i library or a Baha'i themed library. Does it need to be a product that has a Baha'i topic in its subject matter or in its full text? What are the boundaries of a library? Now, you might say that at the farthest reach that there's no boundaries to Baha'i library. That it could be that knowledge, it doesn't matter whether it has reference to specific Baha'i ideas or identities. But I think Steve can talk about all of these issues about what it is to collect, how you collect, how you maintain that collection, how you comprehend that collection, and then how you share the knowledge of that collection with others. It used to be, well, for individuals, it was a personal hobby or practice. But now it's no longer personal, it's collective. Whether that's an institution or an individual, you have the choices to share your library or keep it to yourself. And these are choices that you would consciously make, and that would have an impact on what a cataloging system you use, what bibliographic material you use. And Stephen is across all of these topics. So it's going to be a great session. So Steve, thanks for coming on today. Look forward to your presentation, and over to you.
Thanks, Graham. I'll just share my screen and get started. You've certainly been very generous in your comments regarding this long-standing interest and effort of mine. Are you seeing my screen now? Okay.
Yes, we can see it well.
Great. Okay. So I wanted to sort of make this as interactive and as practical today as possible and try and highlight some of the practical issues of managing a catalogue. But just a bit of background before I sort of get started. As Graham said, I've had a long-standing interest, but about 4 or 5 years ago in New Zealand, the National Spiritual Assembly decided to redevelop its National Baha'i Centre in Henderson and Auckland and repurpose it because it had moved its essentially corporate offices into the city, and Henderson is right on the outskirts of Auckland. To redevelop the National Baha'i Centre where the National Baha'i Reference Library was and redevelop it into a training institute. So the challenge became what to do with the existing library. So I took the opportunity to bring that library to where I live in Kapiti on the North Island of New Zealand, and developed a plan to merge that collection, which had not really been systematically maintained for the previous 20 years since the passing of a dedicated archivist who worked on archives and library material, and with a plan to merge it with my own fairly substantial Baha'i library collection as a way of surviving it into the future and having a succession plan. And part of the National Spiritual Assembly's objectives, once they built the Training Institute, would have been to redevelop the rest of the site and build a purpose-built library and archives as well. But that's probably on a fairly long-term horizon. But that's how I got to be in the situation where I started to expose a public-facing library catalogue to the internet, which represents the holdings of that library, which, as I say, is a merge of this existing library and my own material. Let's just recap how libraries fit into the Baha'i grand scheme. They're actually part of an institution, part of the institution of the Hazrat al-Quds, both national and local Baha'i centres. One of the component parts is the library. And so this institution of the National Baha'i Reference Library represents that function. Although it's distributed, not in the same physical location, it's part of that complex of that institution. And so part of this is developing that capability to taking it to the next level. So when I walked into the situation, the Baha'i materials were in the top of a 3-story A-frame building exposed to a lot of sunlight. And there was a old-fashioned paper card catalogue. So no one knew exactly what were the holdings of that library. And so the first challenge was to start thinking about how to catalogue it. Because if you don't know what you don't know, then you can't really proceed in evolving new knowledge or understanding what's gone on in the past and developing and extending and growing Baha'i knowledge. And also, I'm pretty convinced that if the Baha'is want to found a new civilization, that civilization has to be founded upon systems of knowledge, and libraries are always and always have been integral to those kinds of endeavor. So that's kind of what motivates me a little bit. And I just wanted to just make a passing note about digital humanities. So this is kind of a library catalogues, I guess, represent one facet of an ever growing and ever expanding field of digital humanities. And there's a kind of a computational turn in humanities happening. It means more than digitization. So there are massive programs of work digitizing manuscripts and that kind of thing. But there's an emerging area around textual analysis, hypertext, data mining, statistical analysis, digital mapping, and visualizing and graphing or network analysis of subject materials. And so this diagram here is just an example of literary analysis of a book using different kinds of tools than you might have considered 50 years ago, using actual textual analysis and document term frequency and whatever. So I see that this library catalog is part of this bigger kind of process, which is this emerging, ever expanding, still defining its kind of spread and impact of digital humanities. But the challenge that I wanted to solve was to find information. So a searchable catalog is really critical. So for a number of years, I served as the editor of the Baha'i Studies Review. And I realized from that experience that a lot of people did not have good access to research libraries and tools, bibliographic databases, raw materials, the fundamental core kind of publications in order to build new research output or extend and review and innovate and elaborate on knowledge that had previously been generated. So I think there's been a trend over the last 5 or 10 years to have more focus on these kinds of capabilities, a more concerted effort to bring it about. And I note quite pleasingly that in the recent announcement of the 9-year plan, there's quite a strong emphasis on developing further social discourse and social action. And of course, all of those two key activities are underpinned by knowledge systems. So I see this kind of activity, this endeavor that I'm engaged in, as directly supporting the plans of the Baha'i Faith and not at odds with or not secondary to, but primary to the underpinnings and successful execution of those plans. And so catalogs, searchable catalogs, for me, are not so much about shelving systems or where do you place the items, because as Graham indicated, catalogs are increasingly merging physical and digital content, or combinations of both. So where the item sits on a shelf is less important than being able to find it. So classification and categorization, or what in the library business is called authorities, are key to successfully grouping and classifying information. And the whole purpose of the searchable catalog is to reduce the unknowns. And so if you have a trustworthy cataloging system, then that allows you to write with confidence, to construct new hypotheses, and to investigate new combinations of material, to identify where gaps in knowledge are and where to focus research effort and so forth. So that's kind of the drivers for myself for doing this kind of work. But one of the things that Graham just touched on is that you can have a catalog and it may catalog something you don't possess. So what we're seeing more and more are meta catalogs or union catalogs, and these identify materials that you know about, but you don't necessarily have. And so that I haven't gone to that extent at this point because I'm really focused on cataloging physical material at the moment. But I have a substantial database of digital material, nearly 40,000 items that will eventually become incorporated into this library catalog. But also there are potentially items which I don't have a physical representation of, or even a digital one, which could go into the catalog. So it's a known bibliographic item. I don't have a holding for it. It's possible in the future that you could, there may be another Baha'i library system that does possess that item. It may be unique. It may be a limited publication in a in a country or a small locality, which is useful to reference in your catalog, and your catalog points to the catalog where the item physically actually is. So these meta catalogs or union catalogs, I think are useful to pursue as well, because again, they extend the reach of the researcher. So I'm just not concerned necessarily about the National Baha'i Reference Library's holdings in New Zealand, but I can refer to other items held in other libraries if necessary. So for example, there's likely to be items held in Jonah Winter's library that are not held in New Zealand anywhere, and you potentially could reference or link to those items, or cache them and include the link as well. And another way to conceive of this union catalog in a larger Baha'i country, for example, would be to aggregate the local libraries into a union catalog, or it could be a combined catalog with the national library as well, because there are always instances of publications that are held locally that are just local productions, or they have unique items just simply not available and never been collected or acquired by the national institution, that could benefit from being integrated into a union catalog for a Baha'i national community. So that is also something possible to consider as well. Now, the other thing just want to touch on is want lists. So it's very difficult to convey to other collectors, to people who want to donate materials, people who maybe have large collections of material and not sure what to do with them, because they don't necessarily know what it is that are your gaps. What are you missing? So until you really build a properly functioning, up-to-date and complete catalog, it's very difficult for contributors or people who are in a position to donate materials and for you to construct a want list until you actually have a function catalog. So that's another motivation for me, is to quickly get to the position where I know what is in my system, and I can make that available to anyone who is in a position to donate or contribute or merge the materials. Otherwise, you'll be in a situation where you're continually receiving materials, most of which you would discard. So this helps target contributions or donations, or the crowdsourcing of new material. Now, at the moment, the production of Baha'i materials is still a manageable thing for a single person to collect most of it without crazy expenditure. But there will come a time when that's not possible, and you may want to make available want lists for new materials to other people who want to contribute by, in some cases they may want to read the material but not hold it, and they may read the material and then donate it to the library and so forth. But want lists are facilitated by having a really good catalog. So this is another kind of motivation for me for getting this up and running, is to identify the gaps. Now, at this point, I estimate after 4 years of active cataloging that I'm less than 10% of the way through the catalog, and I've cataloged about 1,500 physical items. It will take quite a while to complete that catalog, but at the end of that time, I do think it will be much easier for donators to engage with the library and contribute tactically the missing volumes. So I just wanted, a little before I sort of maybe switch to the catalog and talk a little bit more about it, is some kind of ongoing activity with the National Baha'i Reference Library is to start to look at other digital artifacts. So books are one thing, print materials, whether they're digital or physical print, but there are many other artifacts now which require careful handling and management. And so I've just recently started a little development project to look at full-scale digital repositories. So you might include audio files, you might include video files, you might include other types of media. Now, these need to be really carefully managed because they all depend on formats and standards, or even in some cases, proprietary code bases. And so in the digital repository world, you kind of need to process everything or transcode it or move it to a standardized, preferably open format, so that it has longevity, so that in 50 years or 200 years, there is a way to retrieve and play back that material. So that is quite a complex field of endeavor. One of the projects that I've been looking at is called Archivematica, and that's emerged from a CERN open source project. And the whole purpose of Archivematica is to ingest and transform digital materials into standardized outputs using open standard formats in order to give that longevity to the digital repository. And on the other side of that, so that if you imagine that's kind of the workflow for taking digital material, audio files or video files or whatever, or even particular kinds of documents. So, but the presentation of that, the search of that is another side of it. And so I'm also looking at a product called Atom, Access to Memory. This is another open source product that gives you the kind of search interface over the top of these digital objects. And I'll give you a quick demonstration of that shortly. But it does mean that there are more standards to comprehend once you get out of the library kind of world. And I've mentioned some of those acronyms there. So libraries and digital repositories are a world of standards. In order to interoperate and share and collaborate and build meshes or networks of knowledge. So if you need to really have some understanding of these standards. It's kind of second nature to me because it's the nature of my work is that I try and work with standardized interfaces and protocols, and interoperability is really key. So in the library world, everything still hinges around a standard called MARC, which is just literally means machine readable catalog. And it's actually been around for about more than a half a century. There's a few variants of these. MARC 21 is a later version supposedly for the 21st century, and you especially find this in US and Canada libraries. UniMarc is International Federation of Library Associations, typically is common in Europe. And there's a human readable version as well. It's a very widespread standard for storing bibliographic records in library systems. Some estimates are that there are 400 billion such records. So to move this standard forward or to change it or to evolve it or to allow it to adapt to new realities and new digital formats is going to be like turning the Titanic around. It's going to take a little while. But there is at least one candidate on the horizon called BibFrame. Now, this is not, I don't want to go any further than this. Bill Collins is on the call and it's probably bread and butter to Bill, but you do need to understand MARC. So that is how you store data in the cataloging system that I'm using. And so that's one of the, you must get to grips with things. You can't manage a library catalog running on WordPress or anything like that. This specialized data structures and way of storing data is built into MARC. So that's just to be clear about that. But there's a lot of information. There's a lot of open source tools for managing MARC records. And if you hang out in library catalogs as I do, many of them allow you to export a record as a MARC record. And then that can be ingested or brought into your system. So anyway, MARC is the whole, everything hangs around MARC. I just want to talk a little bit briefly about the collection policy and scope for the library that I'm currently worked with. It's because it's a national level reference library. The idea is to have a broad and Catholic collection of materials. So, we have everything from children's storybooks to learned tomes. So it's a broad-based approach. Primarily the material is in English, but the collection policy encourages the acquisition of material from our neighborhood area in Polynesian and Melanesian languages. It's interesting because maybe 30, 40 years ago, and Graham can comment on this later, there was quite close ties and dependencies between New Zealand and Australian community and their Pacific Baha'i communities, but they've largely grown up and lived their own community lives, and so those ties aren't quite so strong. But in New Zealand, there are considerable groups of Baha'is from these communities who live in New Zealand, and they still speak these languages. And so we still regard it as part of the family of languages that we're interested in. And there's a small proportion of New Zealand's native Te Reo Māori language. Not a lot of publications, but it is growing, and they've recently appointed a ongoing translation body in New Zealand to extend that work. So obviously that's will be a core part of the collection. In terms of the languages of revelation, Persian and Arabic, it's really on a best efforts kind of basis because it's currently quite incomplete. But I think eventually, once certain members of the Iranian diaspora community living in New Zealand reach a certain age or pass away, there may well be some substantial library donations that could extend and refresh and make more capable of those libraries. But what I'm really focused on are the original, printed volumes of the original writings of the Baha'i faith. But it does mean that if we are considering other foreign languages, then the restriction is the material has to be significant or original or the only source for the material. And so practically that means there is some additional material in Persian, Arabic, Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, and a little bit of Russian. And these are very specific selected publications where they're known to have highly original material. It's sourced from manuscript archives or, is written by, leading scholars of their field of expertise. But it does mean that we don't keep translations of Baha'u'llah Niyar or other common materials, but we do, for example, have a significant collection of Bahir Rafati's works. So that gives you a rough flavor as to what we're trying to do. That's roughly kind of my collection policy and scope. Be broad and Catholic, to give give a wide range of the children's books. It's not a borrowing library. So the children aren't going to waltz in and borrow the books, but people who study children's literature in the future will have a reasonably good repository of such materials. They'll be able to examine the evolution and refinement and growth of Baha'i children's literature from that portion of the collection. And it's 3 or 4 meters long in my collection, just Baha'i children's books. So to the tools that I'm using. So the library catalog is based on a software project that's been going on since 1999. It's a open source library called Koha. Now that started when a small rural region in New Zealand called Horowhenua was searching around for a new library system. It's a library trust of sort of small town libraries, gathered together as a consortium. They could not afford a corporate solution from the big suppliers around the world, and so they were looking around for a low-cost open source solution. And so this Koha was born, as these things do, just out of need, out of a few people's interest, and it's continued to evolve for more than 20 years now. And Koha in Te Reo Māori means gift. There's one major commercial fork which has evolved quite in its own direction. There are people who commercially host Koha, so if you don't want to roll your own, and it is quite a technically complex system. There's a lot of moving parts. So if you are interested in this solution, then I think that you should consider maybe paid hosting. So they will host the system on your behalf and maintain and support it and keep it up to date and back it up and that kind of thing. And there's a number of providers that are available on the Koha website. But it's interesting, it's started out life in New Zealand, but it's become a worldwide concern now. It's quite an active, well-managed, well-supported product. Lots of large libraries, lots of large academic libraries support it technically, contribute developers to develop the product. From my point of view, I'm only using a very small fraction of it, which is concerned with on the staff side, if you like, or the internal side of the system, which is building the catalog. And then you have the other side of the software, if you like, is the OPAC, the open to the public catalog, which I expose on another server environment completely. So they're logically quite separate. Now on the Koha is very capable. It can be used as in a kind of lending library situation. It'll manage cash registers, it'll manage overdue books, it'll manage every aspect of library life. So I'm only using a very small portion of its capabilities, which is around the cataloging and the catalog itself. So the purpose of the catalog would be for a user in New Zealand or a visitor to New Zealand, or a scholar coming to New Zealand perhaps, to use the library's resources if they think it's suitable to their project, to at least find materials and to know what is in there when they come. But it's not going to help you necessarily retrieve everything. You literally still have to go to the library. But at least that is one step. Because in the past, you would have had to find the caretaker to the library if they were around, get the keys, go up to the library, open the drawers to the cards and search through the cards. And the cards have a limited number of searches. It's mostly alphabetical by author or alphabetical by subject. And that would be assuming that the subjects were categorized in a way that was of interest to your research project. So I'm hoping that a searchable electronic catalog will increase the number of users of the library and also, as I say, be the sort of keystone for developing it in the future. Now, maybe I'll just pause there because I've got just some comment about some of the challenges of cataloging. I'll just bring up OPAC. Yeah, can you see so this is actually live on the internet now. It's just in a development kind of environment. It's not currently integrated with the National Assembly's library systems, but it would be at some point. I'm just reusing an old Association for Baha'i Studies domain here, but this is effectively the searchable catalog that you might find inside the library. You might have a searchable catalog machine, allows you to sit in the library and search, and exactly the same catalog is sitting out there for anyone to search. So as I say, there's around about 1,500 odd catalog books, and by cataloged I mean the bibliographic entry has been entered and the holdings have been identified. So in many cases, because of the merging of the two libraries, we do have duplicates in some cases. And so some we've kept. It's often useful to have a backup copy. So the holdings is going to be a slightly higher number than the actual items. So that's a distinction you just need to understand, is that a holding is the physical item and an item is the record of that item. So here we're looking actually at the collection of Shoghi Effendi's writings that are held in the library. They've all, and as far as possible, I've tried to link to a digital copy of these books because they are also widely available. But these are literally the books that are in the library attributed to Shoghi Effendi. Now, if I look at one of these, you can see that I can actually expose this as a MARC record. So if you're a librarian in another place in the world, could be Uganda, for example, and you're trying to develop your library, if I've done a reasonable job of cataloging these, and to be honest, it's basically try and get them in as fast as possible at the moment, you could still take this MARC record in the various different formats here and import it into your library system and save a lot of time in terms of cataloging and classifying, setting up those authorities into your system. Or you could even send me an email saying, I would like the whole lot. Give me the whole lot, the whole library as a MARC record, and I can progressively import them into your system. But MARC is the lingua franca of libraries. So maybe we can take a look at one. I don't know if this is how human readable this will be. Perhaps I should have chosen another format, but essentially they encode all of the kind of facts and attributes of the book that are displayed here in human readable terms. Yeah, so this is a MARC record. So it's got all of these control codes at the top, all the way through to here, and then it starts to identify these control numbers are all part of the MARC record. Out of interest, but I can also save this record in a writer friendly. So someone like Graham, who's a prolific author, maintains his own bibliographic databases for his writing purposes. He may come across this book and decide that he'd like to import it into his library system. And so he can do that with this. This is RIS format. There are other formats available, but RIS format is readily as a standard for exporting a bibliographic record that's accepted by many systems. So here you've got two choices, BibTeX and RIS. Now this is what I would like to see on Jonah's site. I'd like Jonah to build this into every item of his site that I can export a BibTeX or a RIS format record. That would be a fantastic capability. So someone, you know, who's an author can rapidly develop their own bibliographic system. Now, so this is the OPAC, right? And I can search it. It's quite a good search engine behind the scenes. What you'll see here, though, is there's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't look like it's got a picture. Why is that? So how this the underlying database that is just sitting in there as sort of a starter for 10 actually owes quite a bit of its material to Bill Collins. So I think over the last 10 years, Bill and Graham and I have tried various attempts to build online collaboration and put records in certain places and maintain kind of private catalogs between bibliographers. But this record here actually comes from Bill's bibliographic tools, which would have originally, if I'm right, Bill, I think, have driven your publication from the 1980s.
Yeah, it would have been in there. Yeah.
So this is actually got a bit of lineage to it, but it's in here because it just can save me time finding material. So it's got a record that I've imported, but it's not cleaned up. So I can filter these out, and this is actually what I hold. These are the two God Passes By related records that are held in the library at the moment. So these are study guides. But yeah, it's been helped. A lot of these records are actually, and you'll notice there's many versions in here. So all the different printings will be in here. There might be versions from the UK and from the US. So this is another challenge of libraries. How far do I go? Should I keep UK and US versions of certain Baha'i publications because people cite them from different versions, and if you ultimately want to backtrack and check a particular paragraph, or was it cited correctly, did it get extracted correctly, then you may need to do that. So that is one of the challenges, is multiple versions of books. How far do you want to go? And it comes down to storage and maintainability, and I guess the likelihood of needing to use it. And the trouble is that many digital versions of books destroy that the print history, because they're often just great slabs of text into a file. And so different pagination, different paragraph location, and so forth. So I'll be interested in having a bit of a discussion about that. That is essentially the catalog. Feel free to have a look around and play through it. It's a little bit slightly behind my authoring side of things, but I can sort here by the newest to the oldest books. So I've recently completed cataloging all of the writings of the Guardian in the book, in the library, hence they're kind of rolling to the top. Yeah, but you will find other books. So these have been cataloged in 2021, but you can use the extended search and search for titles by publication date. Now, hopefully that will, let's think of a recent book. Let's see what holdings we have for Moojan. So 44 results, Moojan, not to be unexpected. I'm not sure why you are tagged to this one, but yes, this is, for example, a chapter that Moojan authored in this collected volume. This is one of the challenges that I'll just come back to later, is what to do with large, expensive books that have 10 or 15 pages of a chapter by a Baha'i author. Do you acquire the book? Do you scan the chapter, or what do you do? So again, a bit of a discussion about that might be useful shortly. Now we're starting to come to the end, but I just want to switch over here because of the power outages and some kind of corruption that I've exposed. So I can't show you my own workspace, but this is a demo site. So if you do want to follow up with the Koha world, there's a number of sites where you can sort of try before you decide to invest in installing and maintaining and holding it. This is what the library staff, if you like, i.e. myself, see when they're authoring the catalog, managing serials, managing acquisitions, reporting on progress, the administration and tools. So this is the intranet side of it. This is the inside of the system. And so it's the other side of the coin to here, which is the public facing OPAC. So if I want to catalog a book, I can come in here and start adding a new record. There's a number of these control characters which are pre-populated for you, but I'll just give you an idea of how it interacts with MARC. So these fixed length elements here, this is how it's encoded in the MARC record, but what it represents is kind of some metadata about the item that you're recording. You know, for example, is it actually a book, or is it a computer file, or is it a map, and so forth? Is it a government publication, biographical material? So that, in many ways, a lot of these are kind of arbitrary and just what it is, what they did when they first sort of invented the standard. But I just wanted you to sort of see that this software is centered around this MARC standard. So these default to books, and most of the time I'm entering books. So normally the first thing that you would enter in here is your ISBN. And then you have the opportunity to add an author, or there's also multiple authors over here if you need to, or corporate authors, so Baha'i international community and so forth. The key area of any kind of classification system are the subject authorities, or the authority headings. And so here, the subject entry here could in fact be the author. And so in the case of a writing of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah is both the author over here on tab 7 and also the subject. And there may well be other terms in here. You might have certain periods of his ministry identified in here. You might have the Aka period, for example. The topical term might be you might be a topical item for the particular writing. I tend to, at this point, to at least group everything together into a topical term called the collected writings of Baha'u'llah. So I can actually literally see them as a large group. But you may have other refinements. You might identify a particular title. You can add geographic areas in here as well. So for example, I've got a couple of books on the Baha'i faith, history of the Baha'i faith in Malaysia. So you'll identify the kind of geographic area of the book. So that allows you to use that subject heading. It becomes a hyperlink in the record. If you look back over here, this is what I'm talking about, these subject headings here. So Iran persecutions Baha'i faith, I can go here and I can drill down into other cognate related publications. So this is one of the beauties of the catalog itself, is that if you structure it carefully and think about those classifications and how things naturally group together, then you can make it much easier for researchers to build sort of knowledge sets around thematic sort of themes. So that's what these kind of topics do, and it's the heart of cataloging. You can sometimes wrangle over quite a bit of time, and I think Bill might have a few comments as well, but this is the essence of libraries, really, is making sense of these headings. And for those who are interested, it's a key aspect of bibliographic control, categorization and classification. And so you find some helpful hints if you are thinking about this. Is the Library of Congress, there's a number of authorities online that you can consult, and it's got, I don't know, several hundred items that are under the Baha'i heading, just to at least help structure your thinking. Linked data is another useful kind of site that shows how knowledge is related and built into kind of networks of knowledge. And also Bill has published a number of things in the 1990s on his in cataloging and classification quarterly, which try to enumerate kind of hierarchies of classification and coding. But I find that you kind of have to build it as you go based on the materials that you have. It's quite a tricky thing to do. And my proclivities and my interests, how fine-grained I go, is driven a lot by my own interests, I think. So I think this is I think this probably marks out a good library from a bad library, how well you do this, I suspect. But just as we start to wrap up, I just would like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges. And I already mentioned editions, so Lights of Guidance is a good example of this. I think it's in 12, 13, 14 editions now. Should you literally keep all of them? Should you have one version of each one? What if someone specifically wants the 11th edition and you've only got the 9th? Or if your edition's 10 years old now, should you get an up-to-date one and stay current? So these are the kind of things that you have to think about. And then if you think about that book, if you have all the editions, that's a meter of shelf space. Is it really a good use of that space? Another example that I encountered, I think Baha'i administration, multiple printings, some forwards are in, some have introductions, some don't, they come and go, they drop out. You know, a serious researcher into the writings of the Guardian or the publication history or the reception history of these writings or anything like that will be very interested in how these books were presented. You know, what was the collateral outside of the main body of the text? Should I be the library that has all of those variants? Do I need to go that far? It's just something to consider. Probably in the case of Shoghi Effendi, it's a limited set of changes because he's no longer around writing and publishing. But it does raise the issue. Do I just have one, the latest, or are there variants that are worth keeping? And then you have this other issue I mentioned of the same book published in different locations with different pagination. When someone cites part of gleanings, you know, which one were they referring to? So that's just one of the challenges. The other challenge is if you have digital links is link rot. It's impossible to guarantee that any digital artifact that you found is going to be there when you go back. So I find that there's no other choice but to manage your own reliable store of digital documents and to manage your own backup and recovery routines. It's just simply too much material has been lost or is inaccessible. So when I look at this, for example, in some cases here, there might be a digital copy of some of these publications. So this minority rights group, I have a PDF of this. This is not linked to anywhere on the internet. This is stored with my library system in the file system. It's backed up and replicated elsewhere. So, but I can from here, if it's one of the beauties of this catalog is that I can from here I download this document and open it, and straight away I have it. So this is another thing that I hope to do with the library, is to maximize as much as possible digital material or digital versions of things, so the researcher can pick it up and keep going with their research work. Now, I think we're coming to a close. I'd quite like to just maybe pause for some questions. Graham, I don't know how we're going for time, but just one other challenge that's sort of emerged in the last few years is print on demand or self-publishing. There's a lot of these books. Some of them are of, well, I would dare say, dubious quality, and some of them are essential reading. But unfortunately, they have basic metadata missing from them. People just literally don't have ISBNs. There's no place of publication. You're lucky to find the author in some cases. So this creates a problem for classification. And it does seems to be getting worse rather than better. In some cases, all you have nothing but an Amazon identifier. So that's just kind of a heads up on that. And another challenge too is that some Baha'i material is only available in Kindle format. So that means it's difficult or impossible for the library to hold the item, because it's requires licensing, and it's typically licensed to an individual person. And I think Amazon make it difficult for libraries to integrate with their massive collection. I think at one point 6 of the top 10 bestsellers were Amazon titles, and no library could make them available to subscribers. So I would discourage Baha'is from using Kindle, or if they're going to use it, make sure there is a print version available. It's a small problem, but an annoying problem, because, for example, one of the titles that's in the Kindle catalog is A History of the Baha'i Faith in Bangladesh. It's simply not available in print. I can't hold it in a library. But if you think of the Union catalog approach, I can certainly make reference to the fact that it exists, maybe point to Amazon as a source. So it's something is better than nothing, but this is a problem of digital rights management and licensing for some kinds of electronic titles. So that's kind of all I really wanted to cover, and I really wanted to have some robust conversation or any questions. I'm not sure what's come up in chat, Graham, but it's in a nutshell what my project is about for the library.
Steve, thanks very much. It's been a great privilege for us to have this opportunity to get an insight into your work. And I'm really so pleased that this work that you've been doing for so long now has a broader reach through this presentation. And I'm sure it will lead to some fruitful dialogue now. You've chosen to focus on cataloging, but you could just as easily have a session on the practice of book collection and curation of that collection and the bibliographic side. But today we're emphasizing the elements of cataloging, and probably there's a hint there about the questions of collaboration, individual efforts, collaborative efforts, the use of these technologies to do that. We have with us today librarians, archivists, researchers, publishers. We have the whole suite of actors in the matter of book collection. So let's see what questions we can put to Steve. The focus today is the practice of cataloging. Also, Elsa, you showed Bill's book. You might, if you unmute and speak, you'll come up, and you'll be able to just show that, because that is one of the stimulating projects in the 80s that Bill contributed that got us going on this. So I'll stop speaking, you speak, and then
Okay.
the screen will catch you.
I use this all the time in my work. Bill knows this. It's an incredible tool. I wish it could go beyond 1985, but it really is very, very useful.
Well, thanks for showing that. I think a few people have been asking Bill since 1985 to what's coming next. He's online now and he can tell us. Bill, do you have some questions and comments for Steve, as well as answering that question of what happens to your own work, your heritage?
I have comments, and actually some of this is going to get covered in, what, 3 weeks from now, when...
Okay, you can hold fire on that, but I understand.
But I did want to say that I very much appreciate what Steve is doing with the National Baha'i Library in New Zealand. And one of the things I'd like to encourage, I don't want to go into all the details here, but I'd like to encourage Steve, where you have questions about how something should be dealt with in terms of subjects and that sort of thing, drop me a message, or let's have a Zoom call. Because there were a couple things that you said that I thought, well, he doesn't need to do that. One of them is making a subject heading for all of the writings of Baha'u'llah. Since Baha'u'llah is the author on all of his writings, you would simply search the author and you'll get them all, unless I'm misunderstanding what you're doing. So,
yes, so I can comment on that. So the problem with Baha'u'llah is often in many compilations. So he's a co-author effectively. So I'm trying to identify that subset of publications where he's the sole author. So the problem is that, yeah, if I do a broad search for Baha'u'llah, I'll pick up hundreds of compilations where he's part of several authors. So it's to combat that. Yeah.
Right. So there are codes in MARC that allow you to put in a name as an added entry, not the main entry, so that there are multiple people who are in a compilation. Don't make them the first author, but so there's a way to do this. And so these are some things to talk about, so that you would actually differentiate in the system how to do that. So one of the things that you were asking about is editions and printings, and I saw Sen's comment too. One of the things we learned at the World Center many years ago is that even though something says it's 1976 edition, third printing, a misspelling or a punctuation may be changed. And we decided very early on, for the purposes of the Baha'i World Center Library, we were going to keep every edition and every printing, because there were changes. And there's this question of the difference between informational value and evidentiary value. Information value is the intellectual content of something, and so you're gonna be able to have that in a digital form without any problem. The difficulty is that the item itself is evidence of what people had at the time, and in what form. And so it's one of the reasons that we had endless conversations at the World Center, and I'm sure Louise had them many times, when people in the process of planning for the future International Baha'i Library said, we don't need space because everything will be digitized. And we said, wait a minute, it doesn't matter, because the item is an evidence of certain things, and there are certain things that you collect that are simply, you're not going to digitize them. Things that are realia, that are objects, physical objects, that aren't just books. And so these are, this is the balance between the two. So over the last 30 years, libraries were the ones who were pushing the IT people to make it possible to make our catalogs be not just the catalogs of the things we held in the library, but anything that we wanted access to, and to be able to say, here it is, here's this thing you can find, we have a digital copy, or it's located in such and such a place. Union catalogs have been around for a long time, but let me tell you, they only, up until about 30 years ago were for physical objects, and they were printed Union catalogs. Thank God now we have something a little bit more. Anyway, I don't want to go on for long, but these are, I think you've discovered the big challenges that we have for organization of this material. But the big thing is bringing them all together and ultimately coming to a point where you can search on any system and be able to have it tell you, we don't have this, but here's where it is.
Yeah.
And we still don't completely have that kind of thing. And I can tell you that from trying to search for things in Russian libraries, which is a monstrous problem to try to deal with. So Russia is very poorly organized on public library access, library catalog access.
Sure.
Anyway, enough from me. Oh, you were asking about my current, that's the other question. Well, I have an EndNote bibliography that's been added to, and Steve gave me access to his EndNote cloud version, which I was working for a long time and so did not, on a day job. And so I just had very little time to compare it. And so that's one of the things that I hope to do. It's on my bucket list, if I live long enough. And so I don't know if I'm going to get to the point of doing another printed version. I don't think printed version is where we're going. I think we need to be at a place where my work and your work, Steve, and other people's work has a succession plan that's available online somewhere. So,
Thanks
Yeah,
for
I
that,
think that,
David. Yeah.
as Graham said, I didn't really cover that, but yeah, there's another whole sort of collection side of things. We're maintaining yet another database in EndNote as well, which is a broader church again of many Baha'i materials, mostly digital, but not exclusively. So it records everything. But yeah, I think the plan will be to some kind of digital publication or some kind of index, or even just publishing the entirety of the records in a Zotero database or some such like that, and make it publicly available. A public resource it has to be. It's not much value being in a printed book. It's aged as soon as you print it. So that is, yeah, we're kindred spirits. We like to see where that goes, and I know that's one thing that Graham and I often talk about.
yeah,
How to do that.
somewhere where everyone can access it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Mujan, please.
Hi. 2 or 3 questions. Firstly, you said that your this Koha software you're using is for sort of the internal workings, but you have something else as a public-facing. What's your public-facing software?
So it's still the same Koha. So it's one software platform. It's just that I've divided them so that they're on 2 separate machines, if you like. So the OPAC is completely independent, and it's more secure that way, because I pretty much guarantee that I won't have anybody intruding into the authoring side of it, which is more precious, right? But yeah, it's still Koha. This is still, I'm sure I haven't got any branding on here. It's just, well, eventually you can have quite sophisticated branding. This is still Koha, Mujan. It's just, it's in 2 parts, what they call the intranet part, or the staff part, which allows you to manage the library system as a whole. And then the catalog, the search book catalog, is a separate kind of separately deployable, shall we say, in its own environment. It's simply a website and a database. It's just a fraction of the total system. Yeah. So you separate out authoring from catalog. Yeah.
Steve, were you going to share screen explaining that? I wasn't clear. Or do you...
I can go back and share again if that's helpful. But essentially, I started to show how you would author an entry in a catalog, and so that is just done on a separate web environment from the catalog. So
I just want to check whether Mujan got an answer to the first question before he asks his other questions.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
is that clear?
thanks. Yeah, I mean, so the public facing bit will just sort of be a search engine that gives you the opportunity to put in author and title and other things and look for things. And subject.
So the search engine is really search, and you can allow users to come in and create their own account, and they can store their own search history.
Mhm.
They can build their lists of favorite things and that kind of thing. So at the moment, I've got that turned off because I don't particularly want people in the development system doing that. But eventually, you could, a bit like WorldCat, you can become a member, subscribe. You can have an account in the library, and you can save your searches and build your own sort of data sets. So that is possible. Yeah, it's quite, there's a lot of features. It's a fairly rich system because it's been developed quite actively for more than 20 years. And there's a lot of it that I don't actually need to use because I'm a read-only reference library. But if you wanted broader capabilities, they're all there. And if you have software development skills, it's endlessly customizable. I should have actually given some examples, but if you go to the Koha site, the official website, koha-community.org, you'll find some examples of large and small libraries that actually use it. But it suits me because I'm able to, I don't host it with anyone else. I self-host, so I can control the versions that are deployed and the backups and what have you. But I think if you don't have comfort in complex systems, then it's probably better just to subscribe to a Koha hosting service.
Yeah, so that was really the second question I was going on to, which is that you went with Koha, it was a New Zealand system and so on, but to what extent did you actually look at other systems, and is there a website that actually compares all of these different library cataloging systems and gives you the advantages and disadvantages and so on? Because at the Afnan Library, we still haven't managed to sort of nail down a cataloging system that we want to use, mainly because there's so many of them, and you just don't know. Obviously the people who are selling these systems are telling you how wonderful they are, but there doesn't seem to be very much in the way of independent reviews of these different library software systems, unless you know of something.
Well, I think there's a lot of commercial products, and they're very, they can run into the multi-millions very quickly. So I'm forced to really look at something that's in the open source kind of world. But even then, there are a lot of companies that provide support, enhancements, customization, the day-to-day management of the system, its uptime, and depends on how many users you're supporting. But my experience is that it's one of the better open source databases. I did do originally a bit of due diligence around different products, and the way to do that is if most open source software platforms have an actual repository, and the open source software is used everywhere all the time in many commercial situations. So what you're looking for is the quality and frequency of the contributions, how many people commit to the source code repository, and how large is the community supporting it, how frequently are they making changes, what are the quality, do they have robust defect management systems, is it an actively supported product?
Yeah, but what I'm really asking is there a website that gives you that compares different systems and gives you that information?
Well,
I mean, it's a lot of work to go through each individual piece software and try and work out the answers to the questions you're asking. Surely someone has done all this work.
Oh, I would defer to Stephen Collins. I would suggest that there's in Wikipedia somewhere, there'll be some table of...
Mujan, I put in the chat also. They are reviewed by the news organization, the publications of library associations, American Library Association, Association of College and Research Libraries. So private message me or email me, and I'll look those up and send you, and they do it every year. And so there should be, now it's likely that they don't get everything, and they may miss some, but you should have a relatively good review.
Mujan,
Okay.
if it helps, I mean, I can send you what I know, but if it helps, this is still in development mode until I'm kind of largely done with cataloging, and I suspect I could be quite an old man by then. But my recommendation to the National Spiritual Assembly will be not to host it themselves, but to use a cloud-based hoster. So it makes no sense to, try and support this kind of complexity in a national office somewhere on some, hardware. It just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a
Okay,
lot of these products, a lot of them are dubious.
I don't want to take up too much time, but I mean, that begs the question of, even if you get one of these companies to support, do they give you the sort of support that means that you don't have to be a tech expert to use the system, or are they still assuming you've got someone on staff, as it were, who's a tech expert, and they're just providing the cloud, the database, as it were, the server space? Anyway, I don't want to take up any more time on that. Just two more quick points I want to make rather than questions. It seems to me that in the Baha'i world as a whole, we really do need to find a way of having a central repository of the MARC data for all the basic Baha'i books, so that librarians all around the world can just download that data and not have to keep re-entering the same books again and again all over the world. And we also need a central database of subject headings, so that, again, you don't have to be thinking, oh, what subject heading should I put this book in? Someone will have already thought this out. It'll be on a central database. You just go along with what the database says. I don't know how much progress we've made to those two things, which I think really are needed in the Baha'i library world.
Thanks, Mujan. And I think we'll park that because it's really important, and we'll see whether Bill brings those issues up when he's on with Louise and Elsa. So we've got 15 minutes left. I've got Stephen Collins, Elsa, and Adib. Stephen?
Hello, Steve. You commented on mine that you wanted to know what was going to happen to all the clippings, and I made some comments about that. Well, I just emailed you. I've been working with someone who's worked with me about downloading the text of the various and the metadata of the various articles. And you have in your email a 26,000 clipping collection in several Excel files that you can figure out what to do with. How's that?
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
As far as I understand it, you should be able to integrate it into your system if you can figure out how to import an Excel file that doesn't know anything about MARC. I don't know anything about MARC.
Yeah, there are definitely ways to build sort of basic MARC files, just from those clippings. That would be absolutely doable.
And it all has URLs back to the clippings I made.
Great. That's the kind of thing, I think that's, for me, is the real, Bill pointed it out earlier. You want a meta catalog, a catalog of catalogs. That's the only sensible way to go. And I totally echo Mujan's comments as well. It would be great if I could have you sometimes see it open a new book and it says, go to the British Library for cataloging data, right? So they've already pre-cataloged it before the thing's even printed. The Library of Congress does the same thing. Australian libraries do the same thing. Some Baha'i equivalent would be fantastic, but I just don't think we're quite coherent and organized enough. But maybe in 20, 30 years we'll get there. I always imagined that it was a function of the International Baha'i Library to produce such artifacts and make them available to all of the subsidiary libraries, but it's apparent that that's not such an easy task, and the focus of the library is to support the World Centre, and it's not the international go-to place for MARC data or cataloging or a union catalog or any such thing. So I think we have to build it ourselves, it seems to me.
Right, and of course it's not the International Baha'i Library, so that's for the future. So Elsa, then Adib.
So in the Canadian Archives community, we have information system networks that are based. So in Canada, we use the Archival Standard Rules for Archival Description, or RAD. There's also the International Standard of Archival Description, ISAD-G. And these are all have a similar basis to MARC and having structures and so on. So the networks, so for example, here in Saskatchewan where I live, we have Memory Sask, where you can go in and you can look up anybody, Richard St. Barbe Baker. I'll be presenting some of this in a few weeks, and say, well, wonder where his records are. And it'll tell you what institution. It'll give you, based on very standard fields as to the title, the scope and content, where it is, first of all, and what does it contain, what's available online, what are the finding aids that have been produced, if it's publicly available, if there's restrictions, and then maybe there's a digital object there, maybe not. Maybe all it does is tell you where to go, which is a really huge thing often. And the way that this works is that the information that's all going into it has been, Rules for Archival Description was first released in the early 1990s through collaboration of quite a few institutions and archivists who understood the principles of arrangement and description. And they collaborated, came up with something, published it, and then about 15 years later did a bit of a refinement. And then this, the Atom, what Steve has referred to, the Archivematica, is all based on that. So I will talk a bit more about it, but you know, Steve is mentioning he'll be an old man before, and many of us will be before we get there, but we have a lot of work. Like, I think if we can develop a vision of what we're heading towards, and then build capacity. For me, it's trying to find more people who are going to be archivists, who actually understand, have all the proper basis to their education, so that they understand how to apply and develop and use the technical capacity. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to leave. I have children I have to go pick up right now. So thank you very much. This is really interesting.
Thank you, Elsa. Thanks very much. So to Adib.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for that presentation, Steve. I'm quite new to all these cataloging technologies, so I found this very informative. Your presentation has got me thinking about the possible usefulness of personal catalogs or inventories. The late Ahang Rabbani put together an inventory of his own personal library. I think he may have originally done this for members of the Talisman listserv, but it made its way to Jonah's website ages ago, and it's been up there for 20 years or more. Let me paste a link to it in the chat. I have it handy. Yes, there it is. So just using something like this as a frame of reference, I wanted to ask, I'm wondering if you think it would still be useful in this day and age for Baha'is with sizable libraries of their own to prepare inventories of their own. And if so, I'm wondering not just what tool would be best for that, since you mentioned several, but what kind of space exists, if any, for the compilers of those inventories to talk to each other. What I mean is there some sort of a virtual network, maybe built into a cataloging tool or offloaded elsewhere, that allows all the members of that network to see what books, articles, and so on and so forth the other members have in their libraries? Because, you know, I imagine that each person preparing their own inventory, like Ahang's, and having them hosted as separate pages on Jonah's website or a spreadsheet somewhere is far from ideal. I suspect there has to be a better way. So I figured I would ask the expert cataloger and bibliographer here.
I'm probably, can I quickly share my screen, Graham? Again, just to, is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a great question, a very exciting one for me. My eyes opened up, and because it's really spot on, that question about how we share these things.
Yeah. So my collaboration platform of choice is EndNote. I've just lost my Zoom. Zoom, come back.
Well, we can see your page and we can hear you.
Can you see EndNote? Yeah. That's the main
Yeah,
thing.
we can see Victor Ali, knowledge education. one of
Right,
the
right,
labels.
right. So Adi, just returning to your question. So this particular platform, EndNote, allows a degree of sharing with others. So I can invite you to this collection, and if you're an EndNote user, you can see this collection. And there's also a web version of this as well. So this is, it's managed, it's Clarivate Analytics who run EndNote now. Well, it's a spin-off from Thomson Reuters, I think. This is the same database, the cloud version, and this is what you would connect to, and you can bring that into your version of EndNote. So this, I think I can have up to 200 now, the current version, 200 people subscribing to this, and we can mutually subscribe to each other. So this is, it requires a license subscription. You need a commitment, because changing formats and changing platforms is quite tricky, but EndNote's been around a long time, and it's ideal from a writer's point of view. But you know, if I post anything to Calimat, invariably it's logged in here as well, right? And the beauty is that I can also attach documents and references and books and multiple files. So, and then it also integrates with the authoring software. So my word processor, I can search for these citations and then put them straight into the document and maintain it. But in terms of collaboration and sharing, there's an element of that with EndNote. So that would be my suggestion, is that if you do want to do this with people who've got substantial collections, then consider something like this. There's a number of these products on the market. I think EndNote is one of the leading ones, but I haven't gone outside the orbit of this. For a period of time, we did try Mendeley, which I think is still in the market, but it's, the cost is quite high with that, but also very much focused on collaboration.
Steve,
So
with that example there, can you just click on edit rather than PDF to show the fields?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
There we go.
So yeah, so this I've captured this probably from an internet record. So yeah, I've just got the author, year, title, journal, issue, pages, DOI, digital object identifier. It's an open source publication, so fortuitously I can have the actual document. In fact, everything with a little paperclip here is an actual digital document. So there's lots of them in here. And this does not overlap. This does not overlap that significantly with the book catalog. And one day this will all be merged into it.
But look, this is just so exciting. Just to add one extra feature to this, because when I started the series, I said you search, you collect, you retrieve, and you use. Can you pull down, not on the right-hand side, but at the top in the search, pull down author to show that you can pull down the author column, the author box a bit further over. No, where Collins is, rather than author contains Collins, just pull down author. Pull down author.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. No, just pull down pull down title now, and move that up. Move that up. Then up. I want to show a particular feature, which is really a powerful feature of EndNote. Just take it up. Please take it up. Please take it up. Now, okay. And now, the second one says any field plus PDF with notes. That means that this product not only in a sense acts as a catalog for your materials, but it's a search engine, so that it does an OCR, OCR on any document that gets put in there. So in addition to searching on your computer, you can search within EndNote and find any string within any PDF that is in your collection. That is the most powerful search tool that I have on my computer. That's why I wanted to mention it. So it's a complete interface between the cataloging, the bibliographic formation, the use by a writer, and the use by a researcher, and also the collaboration that Steve's talked about. It's the most powerful tool that I know of. So I'll end it there for my part. And Adib, if you've got anything more, please say so. Otherwise, I'll move to Jonah.
No, by all means, move on. I just want to express my appreciation. This was a great demonstration, however brief it was. You've got me sold on it. I'd heard of the tool EndNote before, I think through you, Steve, actually once or twice, but I'd never seen it in action, especially in these kinds of use cases.
I think
So
we could
thank
have,
you.
if we could have a presentation on it by Steve,
Yeah,
you know, in the future to show the power of it and the collaborative integration of it. But that's for another day, because today was cataloging, not bibliography as such, but this is the overlapping question. Can we move to Jonah?
Should I just press my space bar? I think I'm still seeing Steve's screen.
you want to share? You want me to stop sharing?
Oh. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate the presentation. This is so valuable, Graham. I can't tell you how important this is, especially at this time for you to be preparing this wonderful series, which it's many decades overdue. Really briefly, when I started my own site, it was not intended to be a library. I was just putting up my own grad school papers. And then it just kind of kept growing and growing, and people kept sending me stuff. And before I knew it, I had a library, but I never had the structure for it or the proper back end. Now it has to be completely redone. And I've been talking with a few of you privately. We started initial steps on reprogramming my site. I don't have the skill or the time or the capacity to even learn how to do this anymore. So I have to hire people. And I think that after this series is done, like by June, I think maybe Bill Collins, Stephen Phelps, Steve Cooney, Steve Collins, myself, and a number of other of us can have some very fruitful discussions as to how we can actually combine these databases or catalogs or create a union catalog. I offer the BahaiLibrary.com for any of these projects. It is at the moment still, yes, my personal site, but it won't be my personal site for much longer. It has to be opened up to the world for collective ownership for anyone to use as they like. I volunteered as a clearinghouse for all these different databases, EndNote databases, et cetera, whatever. And I think in a few months, we can have some very productive conversations as to how we can proceed about coming up with this unified database for all things Baha'i academia. So things will be happening, and I think when the series is over in June, then we can start actually getting it produced. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. That was a pre-announcement. He just couldn't contain that announcement of the development of Baha'i Library because it's so relevant to what we're talking about today. Now, look, we're at the 90-minute mark, so I just want to invite anybody who hasn't made a comment so far or feedback for Steve, who may have something to share with him, some impression, some feedback for him, that would be most valued. So I just offer that to you before we bring the session to a close. Okay, Steve, well, there you have it. Everybody's satisfied for now. There's everybody's giving a clap and thanking for it. I've been just so pleased to be able to bring this project of yours to everybody's attention. We know what you're doing, but we haven't had a chance to hear from you in more detail. So it's been very much appreciated today. So thank you all for being part of the session, and we'll say goodbye for now.